What's inside this crater in Madagascar? Let's check it out.
Madagascar, an island off the coast of Africa. It's one of the most biologically diverse places in the world. Almost all of its plants and animals aren't found anywhere else on Earth. And when we looked at it from space, we saw a spot. A massive dark circle, almost perfectly round, over 13 kilometers in diameter, and big enough that roads are diverted on either side of it. Looking at it from the side, we could see it was a mountain. And if you zoomed all the way in, you could see a village. Nestled in the crater at its center, 8 kilometers from the closest labeled town on Google Maps, isolated in a remote part of a remote region of a geographically isolated country. It looked like it could have been there for generations, but if you looked backward through time, each year, it gets smaller and smaller. And before 2008, there was no one there at all. I wanted to try to answer one question. Why did these people move to such an incredibly isolated place?
This feel like one of those situations where we might not need to do some digging. We might need to just leave well enough alone. You know how you go digging for something and then when you find it, you wish you never had in the first place? This might be one of those times.
I was really starting from zero here. I didn't know anyone in Madagascar. I didn't know that much about Madagascar. But the question was, could we get in touch with the people living here just by using the internet? The closest location tags were on the edges of the mountain, a butcher shop, a playground, and a historical landmark, but none of them were real. They all seemed to be random references to the popular Japanese manga and anime series Attack on Titan, written in Russian. The ones that did look real, churches, hospitals, and schools, didn't have much of a presence on the internet. So we looked at content that had been geotagged nearby, first on Twitter, using the coordinates of the village and a search radius. Until finally, at 12 kilometers away, we found someone, a nonprofit worker who had posted from a nearby village in 2014. We asked if he knew anything about the village on the mountain, but he never got back to us. On Instagram, we looked for pictures tagged in the nearest town, Antanaditra, and found an aid organization that had posted pictures taken there. We asked, but they didn't know. They'd never actually been on the mountain at all. And finally, we looked at geotags on YouTube, and there was a video. Geotagged right next to the village on the top of the mountain. But then it was just more Attack on Titan stuff, also written in Russian. After a while, it felt like the internet alone was not going to tell us very much. So we started reaching out to experts who had worked in Madagascar. Experts in agriculture.
Vous voulez parler du cercle là? Je suis jamais allée dans la zone que vous pointez là, je ne saurais expliquer trop.
And experts in biogeography.
Again, I'm still feeling those vibes of, well, if it's this hard to locate something close within that vicinity, and everybody's, I don't go there. I don't know nothing about there. I don't go there. I don't go there. That's red flag for me.
I don't know people working in that region, frankly. It's in the middle of nowhere.
Madagascar is a country of almost 29 million people, slightly more than Australia, slightly fewer than Texas. And a majority of the country's population, over 60%, lives in rural settings a lot like this one. But this village was particularly remote. If you zoom out, the closest major city is a place called Siroanamandid, 18 kilometers away, with a population of over 44,000. At this point in the process, it felt like we might need to take a more drastic approach. Maybe we could hire someone to make the journey up the mountain to the village itself. Someone in Madagascar. That's how we met Lali.
Hey, hi, Christopher.
Lali runs a production company in Madagascar, in the capital city of Antananarivo. She was down to make the trip. She started to gather a crew, make local contacts, and figure out how to get from Antananarivo all the way here. They weren't exactly...
That's what this is giving off. Y'all, this is giving off Sentinelese vibes. That's what it's giving off. You know, the island, the Sentinelese, yeah, you stay away from them. The government ain't even gonna help you with them. That's what this is giving off.
Sure yet how they would get up to the village, or how they'd establish contact once they got there.
It's just down there and we are going to film it.
Until finally, after traveling 10 kilometers by motorcycle and on foot, they made it to the top of the mountain. But when they got there, and were about to descend to the village in the crater, a massive storm appeared on the horizon, and they had to turn back. They got extremely close, but making contact with the village would have to wait until the end of the rainy season, which was in May, 4 months away.
Structure is actually made of rocks that form deep within the Earth's surface. It has been dated using uranium-lead geochronology dating techniques and is actually 90 million years old.
90 million years old. Older than Mount Everest, the Grand Canyon, Vesuvius. This thing was ancient. 90 million years meant that this thing had been extinct for a very, very long time. But that number was significant for another reason.
That is actually overlapping on the India and Madagascar separation.
Okay, Slavo's talking about this moment, right here, when India broke apart from Madagascar. Because these rocks are 90 million years old, it makes sense that the volcano might have something to do with this massive separation of continents. So we went looking for experts who knew more about the breakup of Madagascar and India. And we found Joe Meert, a geology professor who's written a bunch about the movement and formation of continents. This was a real crash course on volcanic geology, so I asked our motion designer Matt to help me make this a little bit easier to follow.
Madagascar and India happen to be located beneath this really deep-seated mantle source. They're called plumes.
When that plume reaches the planet's crust, it forms a hotspot.
As Madagascar moved over the hotspot, it burned a hole through Madagascar and produced all the volcanics all over the island.
As Madagascar's continental plate continued to move, those volcanoes were eventually cut off from the hotspot, and without a heat source, they cooled and collapsed.
And then you're left with the plumbing system that was underneath that volcano.
So that's what we were looking at, the collapsed remnants of a volcano formed by a hotspot that had broken up Madagascar and India. At this point, I had no idea what any of this might have to do with the village that we could see on Google Earth. But right about then, we heard back from another Malagasy expert we'd emailed. He sent us a link to mindat.org. This is like the Wikipedia of minerals and mines. And it had a page about the mountain, including its name, the Ambohibi Massif. Finally, we knew the name of this mountain that had been unlabeled on every other map we'd seen so far, and we could search for it. We found maps from 1899, 1903, and 1916, where the Ambohibi was always labeled as a lush forest, the only one for almost 100 kilometers. That definitely didn't seem to be the case anymore, but maybe these old trees were a clue. We kept looking, and we found old reports. One from 1933 said that at the highest part of the massif, there is a very open valley called by the indigenous Andronomangatsiaka, or where we find fresh water. Water. Maybe that's why the villagers chose to move there. The mountain's higher elevation meant that it got more moisture, feeding these streams that flowed down the mountain in every direction, and making the center a perfect place for a village to thrive. Then we tried to find reports that were a little bit more recent, and on Google Scholar, we found a 2012 paper about the origins of the Ambohibi. It covered everything from the geochemistry to plate tectonics to microscopic images of its rocks, and it included rock samples taken right next to the crater village. The paper was written by a South African geoscientist named Ndivuo Cecilia Mukosi, and if she took rock samples from right here, when the village already looked like this, she had to have been in contact with the people living there. Mukosi was busy doing field research for the next few days, so in the meantime, we dug deeper into her paper, and it told us what the formation actually was: an alkaline ring complex. Alkaline refers to the chemistry of the magma. It's the kind of molten rock that appears when continents break apart, like Madagascar and India did 90 million years ago. I took this new term and looked at dozens more across the world.
I was thinking, first thing I thought when he said alkaline, I thought it was something to do with the water that he had just figured out and discovered about. Not to date back to that with the volcano stuff.
Sudan, Egypt, Niger, Russia, Namibia, Zimbabwe, the United States, they were everywhere. A whole planet covered in circles, the remnants of long extinct volcanoes. I wanted to talk to someone who could tell me why a community of people would want to live on top of an alkaline ring complex. So I went looking for the most famous researcher of the most famous alkaline ring complex out there. That's when this caught my eye. The Richat structure.
Is that the Eye of the Sahara? I think that's the Sahara, however you pronounce it. I think that's what that is, right?
Also called the Eye of the Sahara. It's an alkaline ring complex in Mauritania surrounded by conspiracy theories, even on Google Maps, where it's littered with comments saying that it's the site of Atlantis, and that nobody
believed to be the lost city of Atlantis. There are a lot of theories surrounding that and different things like that. Listen, man, this is just a testament to this YouTube channel, bro, because several years ago, I didn't know what none of this stuff is, but the deep dives we've done and looked into this stuff, without even knowing, just first glance, I could already tell you what that was. Come a long way.
Knows what it is. But geologist Michel Jabrac does know what it is. He's done tons of research there and even helped get an illustration of it onto Mauritania's currency.
Alcalin, les alcalins en géologie, c'est le potassium, le sodium et le calcium. Pour l'agriculture, le calcium, c'est excellent. Ce qui veut dire que je ne serais pas surpris que la ferme, elle se place au milieu parce que les roches sont plus calcaires dans cet endroit-là. Ça, c'est un bonheur pour une agriculture africaine. Parce qu'on a de l'engrais sur place, tout simplement.
Soil. Maybe that was why they moved here. This alkaline ring complex formed when continents broke apart, left behind a valley with remarkably fertile soil.
Possibly.
There was one last person who might know something about the community living on top of the Ambohibi complex, Indivuo Cecilia Mukosi, the geoscientist who had studied it. When she was back from doing field research, we spoke.
I was first or second person to map the Ambohibi complex and try to understand how it was formed. It's quite fertile, and so the area is good for agriculture.
One of the things that really caught us in the first place about this location was the fact that at the crater of the ring complex there is what looks like a farm right in the very middle. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you sent me that there wasn't people living on the center of the complex. I think this is quite recent, and I was there 15 years ago. Things change after a while.
I'd missed this the whole time. Mukosi's research was published in 2012, but she had actually visited the Ambohibi 5 years earlier, in 2007, before anyone had moved here in the first place.
Oh.
So that was it. We'd been trying to learn about this incredibly remote village in an incredibly remote part of the country, and the one person who had formally studied it most recently had done so before the village even existed. We had all this research, and we were stumped. But now the rainy season was over, and we finally had a chance to send Lali and her crew to make the journey again.
Hi Christopher, we are leaving now, so we are heading to Tiamadit.
We are now on the way.
Lali brought a whole new team, including Rado Andriamanis, a filmmaker who captured scenes as they drove through the Madagascar countryside, of pineapple vendors, basket weavers, and rice farmers.
We are 1 hour and 45 minutes approximately from Tiamadit.
Siromandid, the closest major city to the Ambohibi. When they made it there, they picked up their final crew member, Zohar, a Siromandid local who would be their guide.
Hello, can you hear me now?
He told me he'd climbed the Ambohibi many times, and even wrote his master's thesis on its water resources, but had never been to the village at its center.
Straight to
Antanditra, just 8 kilometers away. From there, they could travel to interview people living on the outskirts of the massif, the crater village's closest neighbors. The crew asked them what they thought made this place special,
Tena loharano tsara madio be zany le resaka ambohiby. Tany mamokatra, tany mbola ampivelomandre taranaka faramandimby.
Fano mahatsara azy le rano, tsara rano.
They'd met the people living
Mess around and had the fountain of youth right there.
Closest to the crater village, but climbing all the way up the mountain would take a full day. Early the next morning, they set off for one last shot at reaching the village.
What you see behind me, there, this line, there, it's the crater. It's like in the middle of nowhere. It's a beautiful nowhere, but still.
Until at last, they arrived.
So we are now approaching the crater.
And they saw the village, up close, full of dozens of houses, livestock, and people. But as soon as they drove closer, things became tense.
Some people in the village think that we are a team of spies coming to take them guilty for something. So we are waiting for someone to do the facilitation.
Yeah, I figured they was going to be met with some type of resistance. Maybe not as harsh as the Sentinelese, but I knew they was going to be met with something.
We still need to wait.
If it was the Sentinelese, they wouldn't be breathing.
After 2.5 hours, one of the town's leaders came to talk.
We finally succeed to find our facilitator.
Ny anarako dia Monsieur Samuel natoko fanomezantsoa. Trano eo amin'ny 10 tafo eo ary ny mponina eto zany hatramin'ny ankizy tonga amin'ny olon-dehibe mahatratra eo amin'ny 300 isa eo. Zay moa zany mpifindra monina ny tonga eto dia mampifindra monina anay izay somary efa tery ny toerana misy anay any Romania any.
More specifically, they migrated from Manandriana, a district in the region of Moroni Mania in the central highlands of Madagascar, a journey of over 380 kilometers. Like the majority of people in Moroni Mania, the Ambohibi residents are Betsaleo, the third largest of Madagascar's 18 main ethnic groups. Meaning they didn't just migrate to a new home, they also became an ethnic minority, now living in a place where the Marina people are the majority. It still wasn't clear why they chose this place in particular, somewhere so remote, until they sat down to interview Raza Finitiala, one of the village's elders.
Nahatonga anay ny amin'ity toerany dia noho ny fikaramana fitadiavana vola zaho nandray dabokandro amin'ny patro tsy nisy rakotoary velo teo Tsoromandidy dia nahita an'ity aho dia sy avy an-tanàna magnontany ahy ny dadan'ny reto ratoky dadan'ny ratoky toy ny radany tsisy tany malalaka ve dia laza misy tany malalaka any fa tany izy dia mety tsara satria vola malalaka dia zay nagniriana azy dia zay naviana eto.
And they gave it a name.
Anoshbe Ambohibi.
Anoshbe Ambohibi, or Big Island Ambohibi.
Atony nahatonga ny anarana ho Anoshbe Ambohibi hodidininy rano atsimo varatra ndraiky anatsinany.
So we had an answer about why they lived here and why they had traveled all this way to live in a place like this. It was for the water and it was for the soil, but more than anything else, it was for space. And it's easy to see why. In the entire district of Siramandid, there are about 49 people per square kilometer. But in the migrants' original home of Manandriana, that density is more than twice as high. And for farmers like them, space to plant, to breed livestock, to build a life, is everything. And then the villagers took Lali and the crew to see what they'd done with all of that space.
They really turned that space into something. That's crazy.
A massive field of hundreds of lemon and orange trees.
Efa trany amin'ny Roumanie zay no manana champ de culture ohatr'izao ihany.
The citrus are a cash crop, fruits grown for the purpose of selling at a market. But to sell their produce at a market, they have to transport it down the mountain to Antananitra, the same difficult journey that Lali and her team had just done.
Nefa zavatra lalana 11 kilometra zany dia mahatsiaro sahirana kely mihitsy izay ponina eto le aratsindalana zany na resaka moto na resaka fivezivezena moto sy ny tomobile zany somary sahirana mihitsy izay eto.
Ny ahtana ihany zany dia falifaly zahay amin'ny famokarana na ny fibena fa kosa aton'ny resaka lalana sy fahamoaka le zavatra sasarana.
Remoteness was the thing that first fascinated us about this village, and it was a central part of their story. But it was a story that stretched far beyond this place. Madagascar has some of the least developed road networks in the world, with just 5 kilometers of road per 100 square kilometers of land. The majority of Madagascar's population lives in rural areas a lot like this one. But only a tiny fraction of that rural population lives within 2 kilometers of a road that's usable all year long, which means that almost 16 million people live essentially unconnected. Having better, more connected roads means an easier time accessing schools, hospitals, and markets, an easier time building a better life.
Wow.
Hey, hi Christopher, how you doing? We've been to the crater finally. They live in a very, very, very remote area because this is like the center of the crater. And the way they live in the middle of the crater and they can sustain themselves, it's amazing. But to access there, it's not an easy life.
When I was going through all the footage Lali's team sent us after they made it home, I couldn't stop looking at this perfect match to the first image we saw of the village. And it struck me. Apart from a few photos taken with cameras hundreds of kilometers up in the sky, there's basically no record of an Oshbe Amboibi anywhere on the internet. Until right now.
I was about to say, I bet that's the way they liked it too. Now that this is probably been made public, I just hope it, you know what I mean? People aren't flooding out there and then they find out that maybe they have this that's good, and then they get, it just can get bad in my opinion, so.
With the internet, we can look at just about any part of the planet. Some of the places we find might be made up, or might be surrounded by conspiracy theories instead of facts. And some we can't learn much about at all without showing up, asking questions, and letting the people there tell their story.